Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, April 3rd, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside, you can expect a pleasant day with a high of 74.1 degrees and a low of 53.7 degrees. It is a time for reflection for many. As we observe Good Friday, we will explore how the tensions in Iran are escalating into a broader international concern and break down the circumstances that led to Pam Bondi no longer serving as Attorney General. Beyond those headlines, we have a variety of other important updates to share with you throughout this episode. All this and much more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We start this morning with the war in Iran, now in its sixth week and showing no signs of slowing down. Today brought a major escalation on multiple fronts, from missile barrages across the Middle East to deepening fallout in global energy markets. Ethan has been tracking all of it. Ethan, what happened overnight?
Grace, this was one of the most intense days of fighting since the conflict began on February 28th. Iran launched a coordinated wave of missiles and drones targeting Israel, Bahrain, and Kuwait, all within the same window. At the same time, the Associated Press and CNN are reporting retaliatory explosions across Tehran and the central Iranian city of Isfahan. It's a significant escalation that's pulling more of the region directly into the line of fire.
Let's start with the strikes on Israel. How bad was it?
The IDF confirmed that roughly 20 ballistic missiles were fired at Israel over a 24-hour stretch. The Independent and ABC News report that at least one struck Petah Tikva, which is a densely populated city just east of Tel Aviv. What's alarming to military analysts is that some of these missiles reportedly carried cluster munitions. That signals Iran is willing to use increasingly indiscriminate weapons, even 5 weeks into this war.
And the Gulf states were hit hard too, particularly Kuwait?
Kuwait may have suffered the most strategically damaging strikes of the day. Iranian drones and missiles hit the Mina al-Ahmadi oil refinery, sparking massive fires that were still burning as of early this morning. But the bigger crisis is the damage to a primary desalination plant. The Associated Press cites Kuwaiti authorities warning that these attacks now threaten 90% of the country's drinking water supply. That's not just a military problem, that's an immediate humanitarian emergency for millions of people.
Were other Gulf nations affected?
Yes. The United Arab Emirates had to shut down its Habshan gas facilities after debris from an intercepted Iranian missile started a fire on the ground. And in Bahrain, which hosts the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, air raid sirens sounded across the capital. Iran targeted IT firms there that it alleges are linked to American military operations. So you're seeing Iran try to disrupt not just military targets, but the digital and logistical backbone supporting the coalition.
What about the coalition's response? What's happening inside Iran right now?
The U.S.-Israeli coalition, operating under the codename Operation Epic Fury, continued heavy bombardment of Iranian infrastructure today. The Washington Post details the destruction of the B-1 bridge, also called the Bilegan Bridge, which was the tallest bridge in Iran. It connected Tehran to the city of Karaj. U.S. officials say it was a vital route for transporting missiles to Western launch sites, so taking it out was meant to choke off Iran's supply lines.
There's also growing controversy over strikes on pharmaceutical facilities. What's that about?
This is one of the most contentious issues of the entire conflict right now. The U.S. and Israel struck the Darou-Paksh pharmaceutical manufacturing company and the Pasteur Institute of Iran, claiming both were dual-use sites for chemical and biological weapons. But NPR and the Journal News report that the World Health Organization and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons say there's no physical evidence of offensive weapons production at either location. The WHO actually condemned the attacks, noting that Darou-Paksh alone produces 70% of Iran's specialized medicines, including cancer treatments and vaccines. The WHO called its destruction a, quote, serious threat to international health security, end quote.
Let's step back for listeners just catching up. How did this war begin?
It all traces back to February 28th, just over 5 weeks ago. A coordinated U.S.-Israeli precision strike in Tehran killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The New Arab and the Jerusalem Post reported that the so-called decapitation strike was made possible by CIA intelligence about a meeting of senior Iranian leaders. Mojtaba Khamenei, the former Supreme Leader's son, was quickly elected as successor, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched immediate retaliatory strikes against U.S. installations and moved to shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
And that strait closure is what's driving the energy crisis we're seeing worldwide?
Exactly. The Strait of Hormuz is the most important oil choke point on the planet, and Iran has effectively sealed it. The Associated Press reports maritime traffic through the strait has dropped by as much as 94%. The few ships that are getting through are being forced to pay toll fees in Chinese yuan, which is a pretty extraordinary geopolitical statement in itself. U.S. crude jumped more than 11% today to over $111 a barrel, according to The Independent, and Brent crude is hovering near $109.
How is that rippling out to the rest of the world?
We're seeing real consequences far from the Middle East. Australia is dealing with a critical diesel shortage, with hundreds of rural gas stations completely empty. Bangladesh has slashed power spending by 30% and is scrambling to secure $2.5 billion in emergency financing just to keep fuel imports flowing. And there's a grim detail from the shipping lanes. A Thai vessel called the Mayuri Nari was recently searched, and crews found human remains from a projectile strike that apparently happened back in mid-March. The global supply chain is under severe stress.
Is anyone working on diplomacy here? Is there any path to a ceasefire?
There is one notable proposal on the table. Former Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif published a ceasefire framework in foreign affairs. He suggested Iran would downblend its enriched uranium to 3.67% and reopen the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for the lifting of all sanctions. But the New York Times reports that President Trump has rejected anything short of a zero-enrichment policy. He has maintained a 10-day pause on strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure, which is set to expire on April 6th, just 3 days from now. But his rhetoric remains aggressive.
What exactly has Trump said?
On the record today, he stated that U.S. forces would continue hitting Iran, quote, very hard, end quote, for several more weeks. He also specifically threatened to bomb Iranian power plants if a deal isn't reached. So the diplomatic window, if there is one, appears to be closing fast. That expiring pause on energy strikes is the date everyone is watching.
The human toll in all of this has to be staggering. What do we know?
Monitoring groups cited by Yahoo News put the death toll inside Iran at nearly 2,000 people, at least 1,973 confirmed killed. Many of those deaths are occurring near government-linked sites in densely populated urban areas. In Lebanon, Israel is pushing new defensive lines against Hezbollah, which has displaced more than 1 million people. 3 Indonesian UN peacekeepers have been killed there as well. And Amnesty International has officially accused the IRGC of war crimes for recruiting children as young as 12 into the Basij militia force to man checkpoints.
There's also been a shakeup in U.S. military leadership. What happened there?
This is a significant development. Military.com reports that U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Randy George was forced into retirement just yesterday by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Sources say George disagreed with the administration's push toward a full-scale ground invasion and with the targeting of civilian infrastructure. He reportedly warned about mission creep toward unsustainable regime change. He's been replaced by General Christopher Leneve. It suggests real internal friction at the highest levels of the Pentagon over where this war is headed.
And the Navy is building up its presence in the region too?
It is. The USS Abraham Lincoln remains stationed in the Arabian Sea. The USS George H.W. Bush has departed Virginia to join the theater. And a third, unnamed carrier strike group has been tracked moving toward the Middle East from the Mediterranean. 3 carrier strike groups in one theater is an enormous show of force, and it tells you the administration is preparing for this conflict to continue and possibly expand in the weeks ahead.
Lot to watch, especially with that pause on energy strikes expiring in just 3 days. Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of it.
Thanks, Grace.
We turn now to a major shakeup in Washington. Yesterday, President Trump fired Attorney General Pam Bondi after just 15 months on the job. Chloe has been following this story closely. Chloe, walk us through what happened.
So the president posted on Truth Social yesterday calling this a move to a, quote, much-needed and important new job in the private sector, end quote. He praised Bondi as a, quote, great American patriot, end quote. But the framing doesn't really match what reporters are finding behind the scenes. Both Time and NPR are reporting she was effectively pushed out after months of growing frustration inside the White House. Officials felt she wasn't aggressive enough in pursuing the administration's legal and political goals.
And this makes 2 cabinet firings in a single month, right? Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was let go back in March.
That's right, and it's worth putting the timeline in perspective. At 15 months, Bondi's tenure is the shortest for a Senate-confirmed attorney general since 1975. That alone tells you something about how rocky this was. 2 high-profile cabinet departures in roughly 4 weeks suggest a White House that's willing to make dramatic changes heading into the back half of the term.
So what specifically drove the president to this point? What was he unhappy about?
The biggest issue, according to Time and the Washington Post, was the failed prosecutions of the president's political rivals. Trump had been pushing Bondi, both publicly and behind closed doors, to go after people like former FBI Director James Comey, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Senator Adam Schiff. Bondi did try to bring cases against Comey and James, but they fell apart in court. Democracy Docket and PBS reported that U.S. District Judge Cameron McGowan Curry threw out the cases back in November because of what the judge called an improper appointment of the prosecutor.
What was improper about it?
Bondi had bypassed career officials to install Lindsay Halligan as an interim U.S. attorney. Those career officials reportedly had serious questions about the factual basis of the charges in the first place. The judge ruled the appointment violated federal law, specifically the statute governing interim U.S. attorney appointments, and that stripped the indictments of any lawful authority. Now, the court didn't weigh in on the evidence itself, but the procedural failure alone was a huge embarrassment for the administration. It made it look like the Justice Department couldn't even get the basics right.
Then there was the whole Epstein files situation. How much did that damage her?
Possibly more than anything else. NPR and CBS News reported that Bondi's story about those records kept shifting. Early in her tenure, she went on television and claimed she had a, quote, client list, end quote, from the sex trafficking investigation. The FBI later said that wasn't true. That contradiction alone raised a lot of eyebrows. Then came the rollout of documents under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The Justice Department released millions of pages, but they were so heavily redacted that lawmakers from both parties were furious.
What were the specific complaints about those redactions?
Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina, described the whole release as, quote, bungled, end quote. And that's a Republican criticizing a Republican administration's attorney general, which tells you how badly this went. The core allegation from lawmakers was that the redactions shielded the names of powerful abusers while actually exposing the identities of survivors. That's essentially the worst possible outcome for a document release like this. It got so heated that the House Oversight Committee issued a subpoena for Bondi to testify under oath, and that subpoena is actually still hanging over her even now.
We'll come back to that subpoena in a moment. But first, there were also serious concerns about what happened in Minneapolis. Can you explain that?
This was a real breaking point inside the department. Back in January, during an immigration enforcement operation called Operation Metro Surge, federal agents fatally shot 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. According to a press release from the House Judiciary Committee Democrats, Bondi refused to open civil rights investigations into the agents involved. Instead, she directed resources toward prosecuting protesters and pressuring local officials to hand over voter data. 14 federal prosecutors in Minnesota resigned over it, citing what they called Bondi's, quote, lawless indifference, end quote.
14 prosecutors walking out at once is extraordinary. Was there a broader pattern of people leaving the department?
Absolutely. NPR and The Guardian both documented a mass exodus of veteran career prosecutors from some of the department's most critical divisions, including national security, civil rights, and public corruption. Critics and longtime civil servants described Bondi's leadership style as a sledgehammer to the department's independence. Ranking member Jamie Raskin put it in pretty stark terms. He characterized her tenure as a, quote, profound betrayal, end quote, and accused her of acting as the president's, quote, personal criminal defense attorney, end quote. He said she'd turned the DOJ into an, quote, instrument of vengeance, end quote.
Strong words. Did Bondi push back on any of this criticism on her way out?
She did. She released a farewell statement defending what she called a historic record of accomplishment. Time and Florida Politics both reported on the specifics. She pointed to a murder rate she claimed was the lowest in 125 years. She highlighted what she said were the first ever terrorism convictions against members of Antifa. She cited the capture of over 90 high-ranking cartel figures. And she noted 24 favorable rulings at the Supreme Court during her time. She also said she'd stay on at the department for another month to help with the transition before heading to the private sector.
So who's running the Justice Department right now?
The president has named Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche as acting Attorney General. And that pick is notable because Blanche previously served as Trump's personal criminal defense attorney. He's already signaled he'll continue what he's calling back the blue policies. So for the moment, the department is in his hands, but the real question is, who gets the permanent nomination?
Any frontrunners for that permanent job?
The New York Times and Axios are reporting that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin is the leading candidate. Zeldin is a close Trump ally, and he's got one practical advantage. He's already been through the Senate confirmation process once for his current role, so the thinking is that could smooth the path. Other names floating around include Jeanine Pirro, who's currently serving as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah. But as of today, no formal nomination has gone to the Senate.
Now let's circle back to that subpoena. Bondi's out of office, so does she still have to testify?
She does, and this is an important legal detail. The Washington Post and The Guardian are both reporting that the House Oversight Committee's subpoena for April 14th remains legally binding. The reason is that the subpoena was issued to Bondi by name, specifically for action she took while serving as Attorney General. The fact that she's now a private citizen doesn't change that obligation. Leaving government doesn't erase a congressional subpoena. She could try to assert executive privilege when she appears, but lawmakers from both parties have said they expect her to show up and answer questions about the Epstein files.
So even though she's out of the building, this isn't fully behind her yet.
Not at all. That April 14th date is just 11 days away. Whether she cooperates fully or tries to shield certain discussions behind privilege claims, this is going to keep her in the spotlight. And for the Justice Department itself, the challenges don't go away just because leadership changed. You've still got depleted divisions, ongoing controversies, and a confirmation fight ahead for whoever the president picks as a permanent replacement. There's a lot of turbulence still to come.
A lot to watch in the days ahead. Chloe, thanks for breaking all of that down for us.
Happy to do it, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. President Trump is prescribing some tough medicine for the pharmaceutical industry. On the first anniversary of Liberation Day, the president signed an executive order to dose companies with a 100% tariff on branded drugs and ingredients. If drug makers want to avoid this bitter pill, they must either commit to onshoring production or agree to pricing that matches the most favored nation rates. It is a tiered system. Building domestic facilities brings the fever down to 20%, while a pricing agreement could result in a clean bill of health at 0%. Major partners like the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Switzerland have a 15% ceiling, while the United Kingdom secured a 10% cap. While generic and orphan drugs are immune for now, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America warns this could cause a headache for U.S. investment in patient costs. Large firms have 120 days to prepare before these duties kick in, while smaller companies have 180 days to find a cure. Looking toward the heavens, the Artemis II crew is really over the moon. After a 6-minute engine firing last night, the Orion spacecraft, named Integrity, officially departed Earth's orbit for the first time in over 50 years. Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen are coasting toward the lunar surface on a 10-day mission that is truly out of this world. While flight controllers for NASA and the Canadian Space Agency had to troubleshoot minor issues with a cabin pressure alarm and a thirsty water dispenser, the crew remains in stellar spirits. This giant leap serves as the ultimate dress rehearsal for the Artemis III mission, which aims to validate the Space Launch System rocket and land the first woman and person of color on the moon by 2028. Back on the ground, there is a major changing of the guard at the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked General Randy George to retreat into retirement, cutting his term as Army Chief of Staff short. Spokesperson Sean Parnell confirmed General Christopher Leneve is stepping into the breach as the interim replacement. This is not just a solo departure. General David Hodney and Major General William Green Jr. were also relieved of their duties as the administration seeks a more warrior-focused command. With nearly the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff replaced since last year, this strategic reshuffle comes at a sensitive time, as active conflict with Iran continues to simmer. Speaking of that conflict, Amazon is delivering some heavy news to its third-party sellers. Starting April 17th, the retail giant will implement a 3.5% fuel and logistics surcharge. As energy prices climb following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and a 46% spike in diesel, sellers will see an average hike of 17 cents per unit. While Amazon claims this is a lighter load than the 8% surcharge from the Postal Service, merchants worry this fee might become permanent, adding extra weight to the burden of inflation alongside similar moves by UPS and FedEx. Finally, a tragedy in Sudan. A drone attack by the Rapid Support Forces struck Al Jabalain Hospital, claiming the lives of at least 10 people. 7 medical professionals, including Director General Dr. Hamid Suleiman, were killed while trying to save others. The strikes hit the maternity ward during a children's immunization campaign, according to Doctors Without Borders. 19 others were injured and moved to Kosti, 50 miles away, in this latest violation of international law, which further cripples a medical system that has seen over 200 attacks since 2023. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.